Long ago, there existed a film series that forever changed the way fantasy would be seen on screen. It was a prosperous time where CGI was used as a tool to enhance shots, and real locations and practical effects were still the norm. But soon that time was lost, and the magic and craft from this era of cinema was left behind. History became legend, legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. Despite the changes to the world and to the industry, this film series has prevailed, remaining the standard by which all fantasy works are judged. After 21 long years, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings remains in the hearts and minds of film lovers, fantasy nerds, and normies alike. Obviously, this film series is still an incredible achievement even in 2022, so I'm not even going to pretend like there's a chance that this movie we're discussing here doesn't hold up. But are there certain things that are showing their age? Conversely, what aspects remain fresh and engaging that modern audiences might still greatly appreciate? We'll discuss all this and more as we look back at the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, beginning with the film that started it all, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Right. Where are we going?
This is the biggest low-budget film being made anywhere in the world at this time.
I don't think this movie needs much of an introduction. If you're watching this, you've seen it, and more than likely enjoy it, unless your brain don't work right. It was written by Peter Jackson, his partner Fran Walsh, and Tolkien superfan Philippa Boyens. Typically, films with 3 or more credited screenwriters are a big pet peeve of mine, since those scripts often feel like they're being pulled in several different directions, but Fellowship definitely feels cohesive in that respect. The story and characters have a timeless quality to them. They're obviously born out of Tolkien's work, but putting these events and characters to screen is going to bring a different dimension than the print version, and I'd say that everything translates fairly well.
What makes this story so special?
The audience is given the perfect lens to experience this world in Frodo Baggins as we follow his journey from the warmth and safety of Hobbiton into the dark and difficult world that lays beyond. The other hobbits are great as well, with Sam adding some additional dimension to Frodo's story and Merry and Pippin serving as some well-handled comic relief.
You know this Elijah Wood guy?
Yeah.
Have you spoken to him?
Yeah, a couple of things.
I was speaking to him today and he's just been a real idiot.
He's up.
Hey!
Hey!
Sit
How are
down,
you,
man.
How are you? Hey, good.
Probably seems cool.
Elijah Wood!
I love how Merry and Pippin sacrificed themselves at the end for Frodo. They were ready to just die in that moment to let him escape, having no idea that the orcs were actually there to kidnap them, which shows how committed they were to seeing this daunting task through. Their chemistry is incredible and feels absolutely real. The behind-the-scenes footage has tons of moments where these two are just goofing off.
Done and done.
Aragorn is a little one note in this film, though obviously his character is explored significantly more in the sequels. Legolas too doesn't have much to do and just sort of feels like he's in the background.
And you have my bow.
Gimli's boisterous personality makes him the most memorable of the fighters in the Fellowship to me. We're given a lot of characters to juggle, so it's forgivable that not everyone has a perfect character arc in this film alone.
You know, the thing that I guess I missed from the theatrical version is that most of the trims we made were to do with the characters, were to do with little moments between Merry and Pippin, or Legolas and Gimli, Boromir and Aragorn, and so
Gandalf's death is a really awesome moment, not because I dislike his character or anything, but the impact it has on both the audience and the characters can't be overstated. It's the moment that tells us this journey is the real deal. The stakes are this high. We also lose the single strongest and wisest character of the party, which makes this fellowship feel all the more vulnerable. Boromir's death is a great moment as well. Through his character, we're able to see firsthand the corrupting power of the ring. He does get his final redemption, and Aragorn takes the first steps toward his ultimate destiny.
My king.
All of their performances, as well as that of the ancillary characters, are top-notch, well-directed, and well-cast. Their chemistry with one another couldn't be more perfect.
And the great thing is we actually became a family. And the fellowship that is represented in the film became a real fellowship. I mean,
one small thing that stood out to me in this viewing was Ian McKellen's close-ups during all the Balrog action.
I loved the look in Ian's eyes. I loved the way that he's reacting to this Balrog. It's fantastic.
Through his performance alone, you get a lot of information as to what this enemy is, its power, its history, and what it ultimately might mean for their journey. The plot is also highly engaging, and I see no reason to think that a modern audience might have an issue with it. It is a 3-hour-long epic, but the long-lasting popularity of the film series shows that even in the TikTok era of bite-sized content, people will ingest longer content if the quality is there. One genuine issue that the film has is that it never makes clear what the One Ring actually does.
Precious.
Really any of the rings. The closest we get is Galadriel in the intro.
For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race.
What exactly does that mean? Does it mean that anyone with one of these rings is able to exert some magical control over members of their own race? Does it increase your speech level to 100? In the context of the film, we see Frodo and Bilbo use it to turn invisible. The world gets all weird and wavy, and Frodo is able to see the Eye of Sauron. Did Bilbo see the eye? That's also not really explained.
We can never be quite sure about the ring, which I think is entirely appropriate to the story.
But what? No. No, not at all. Everything in this universe revolves around this damn ring. We need to know what it does. The vagaries of great powers simply aren't enough.
In some ways it's an external power, which is frightening and aggressive and which you've got to resist. In some ways it's a sort of psychic amplifier which brings out what your own problems and weaknesses are.
What? What the hell does that mean?
I'll be taking a length of toilet paper in my pocket just for emergencies.
Whatever this guy meant by that, it does not come through in the material here.
It's clear that the ring is, in its way, addictive. It's got all the complexities of that state.
Yeah, but
Nobody
what does
can
it
trust
do?
themselves. As to what people are being addicted to,
Yeah?
it seems to me that's really very clear. It
Yeah?
is power. People start off with good intentions. They want the
what?
power in order to carry out the good
What?
intentions.
What are you
But once
talking
they've got
about?
the power, they won't give it up, and the good intentions turn
what?
increasingly to bad intentions.
But what does it do?
What's the significance of the ring?
The ring is basically the epitome of evil. The Dark Lord Sauron forged this ring to control all of Middle-earth. So in this ring is his life's blood.
What?
He's trying to get the ring back to himself so that he can actually take over Middle-earth, basically.
But what does it do? All joking aside, this is a genuine problem with this film. Other than the invisibility thing, some vague notions of power, and an implication that Sauron uses it to fling people around, it's simply not made clear what this thing does.
It is a gift. A gift to the foes of Mordor. Why not use this ring?
Yeah, so what does he mean by that? Use it to do what? Rally the troops? Swing vaguely at some orcs? Honestly, the film doesn't even make it seem very powerful. Isildur cuts it off of Sauron with half a sword, obliterating him in the process. And delete that comment, lorehounds. I don't care if it's explained in the books, or in the Silmarillion, or if it was scribbled by Tolkien on a notepad that was tucked away in a drawer for 50 years. I'm talking about the movie. That's what matters here, and this is a genuine issue with the film script. I do like how the ring feels like its own distinct character in the film, though. This points to a somewhat larger issue with the film. There are a lot of world-building elements that aren't handled absolutely perfectly. Like, sometimes characters just say random stuff, and to a layperson, and I am and was that layperson when I saw these films as a kid, these statements make no sense.
Crabine from Dunland! Hide!
What? From where?
To the bridge of Khazad-dûm.
What's so significant about this random little bridge? Why does it have a full name in this dwarven mine?
White town of Ecthelion, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver. Murder. Yargonath.
This was the great watchtower of Amonsul.
I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Udun!
I give you the light of Erendil, our most beloved star.
Light of who? What is this thing? What does it do? I know we find out in Return of the King, but to someone just watching this movie, it means absolutely nothing. It's their most beloved star? Do they have other stars? What's a star in this context?
I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel.
What? What does any of that mean? Where are you going? The west? What does that mean? What's going on here? Overall, this is a minor point, and I understand that not every detail needs to be spoon-fed to the audience, but the issue lies in the sheer number of things that are named and brought up that have no meaning to the audience that make the film a little bit inaccessible and might disconnect people from the material. Now let's talk a little bit about the visuals. In some places, Fellowship is definitely beginning to show its age in the visual department. In other aspects, the visuals hold up exceptionally well. Let's start with the bad. This is an early CG film, and as such, not all of its computer-generated effects hold up perfectly. It never gets bad, though, and the fact that so much of it does look so good today is a testament to using their CG wisely. But the technology has gotten significantly better since the late 90s, early 2000s, so some details stand out. Some of the compositing looks a little wonky, and some of the really complex CGI shots lack some fidelity that you'll find today, but there wasn't a whole lot you could do about that back then. I honestly have no clue how this shot managed to make it into the final cut, but hey, it was a different time. At the time, this stuff was completely groundbreaking. Even a shot as simple as Merry and Pippin jumping onto the cave troll in one fluid take would have been impossible up until that point. Unlike some other films in this era that used the CG stuff way too much, the CG in Fellowship is used relatively sparingly and strategically, so the slightly dated moments are much easier to forgive and helps the movie hold up today, again compared to other contemporary films. The other minor issue I'll bring up is that the film has this glow to it that films in the early 2000s seem to have had. It's not everywhere, but it's definitely a dated feeling element. This was actually pretty much removed, I think, in the 2020 4K re-release. I chose not to use this release to review the films, as it's just not the way most people have watched the films over the last 20 years, but it seems as though they made many changes to modernize the series visually, which probably helps the project hold up on the whole. Also, this is more so with the editing than anything else, but there was another thing editors like to do in the early 2000s, and it's this weird choppy slow-mo. It happens a few times in Fellowship. You don't really see it as much today. As for what holds up in regard to the visuals, man, I don't even know where to begin. While there are places where the CG is beginning to show its age, the technology is used in great ways elsewhere. Like this shot, for instance. It's a really cool shot. A lot of the way that shots that feature the hobbits with larger characters are done is through forced perspective or with body doubles, but this shot couldn't have been done with either. Frodo comes off the step, and then Gandalf follows him. Daniel Radcliffe here isn't really 4 feet tall, so how did they do this? Well, remember how I complained that some of the compositing is obvious? Here's a place where it's done flawlessly, because this shot is a digital composite.
All right. We put it away. We keep it hidden. We never speak of it again. No one knows it's here, do they? Turn. Do they, Gandalf?
Crazy, right? I'm guessing this shot at the Council of Elrond is too. Ian McKellen is only 5 inches taller than Shia LaBeouf, and he looks absolutely tiny. When he goes to sit back down, you can kinda tell that Ian McKellen isn't actually looking at him too. In the wide shot, you can see that it's Frodo's actual 4 foot tall body double as well, played by Kenyan Indian actor Kiran Shah.
Got to have a goal, and if you got that goal, it doesn't matter whether you want to be an actor, a solicitor, a doctor, whatever. Do it. Go for it and work at it. Struggle with it and you'll get there.
This take where Gandalf enters Bilbo's house is absolutely astonishing. Like, I have no clue how they did it. Forced perspective? CG maybe? It looks seamless.
And I wanted to really spend a lot of time on the shot here where Ian McKellen and Ian Holm are together in the hallway. And we shot them separately. Ian McKellen was against blue screen, and the hat handover with the stick was the most tricky part of the shot, which was basically involving a different size hats, different size sticks, and blending the two together with a computer.
To keep backtracking, I love how much of the movie is filmed in real locations with CG used to supplement shots rather than create them altogether.
How much of this was an actual set? How much of this is computer generated?
I'd say most of it is actually set and locations.
Even today, the whole digital environment thing is used as a crutch in order to be lazy and cheap. While the blue screen made those Star Wars prequels look terrible, the way they do the new Star Wars stuff gives me the same feels. Instead of blue screen, they now have huge, circular, HD LED screens that they project behind the actors. Everything is filmed on these screens now, and the sets look just as small and limited as they did when they just used blue screen. The directors will tell you that they have more control over lighting or whatever, and I'm sure it's very useful in that regard, but the reality reality is that everything just looks fake and flat and small. You can just see where the set ends in every shot, maybe even more so obviously than when they just used the blue screen.
It's hard because you take your attention off of the dialogue and sometimes off of what you're doing, and just trying to remember, I've got so many different marks, and I wave my hand here and that moves there, and that's really supposed to be, a she, and he's supposed to be something else, and that's an alien. You've got so many more variables to play with that's distracting and sometimes lose your place.
But what's it like on the Star Wars set?
Completely different, because our world in New Zealand was rugged and kind of dirty and messy, and it was this passionate kind of experience. Star Wars was like sterile and clean, and they were shooting digitally, and they had like editing stuff on set.
Right.
It was very strange.
Contrast this with something like Fellowship of the Ring. These environments feel more real because they generally are real. There's elevation, there are real things for the actors to interact with, it just looks and feels better. As to whether the inclusion of real locations and complex sets help the film hold up, I think it absolutely does. This series is 20 years old, and it puts to shame products made today that have access to bigger budgets and better technology all around. It's like, come on, dude, you're literally Disney. You can afford to shoot on location. Like, they built the Shire in a real place, and it looks a billion trillion times better than any set you could build with a blue screen or a fucking LED TV background.
And these are all artificial oak leaves that are wired on. There's about 250,000 artificial leaves. So we had 10 people for just on a week and a half wiring leaves.
Stagecraft is incredibly efficient. We're seeing crews cover 30 or 50% more pages per day, which is an incredible improvement for the production process.
Yeah, that's cool and all. I'm sure Disney is saving a buck, but there's something to be said about tangible, real environments that blue screen and Stagecraft will never truly replicate.
While most people are at home trying to save their houses and sandbag their belongings, we make a film.
Even in this film series, the whole green screen stuff became an issue when they started making those Hobbit films. Now, one thing that the behind the scenes to the Lord of the Rings shows you is how enormous of a hassle practical effects are.
Anytime that I got stressed or tired or felt exhausted, I just would say to myself, look, you're making the Lord of the Rings, and I'd immediately kind of perk up again.
Going to distant, untamed locations with huge crews is expensive, creating unthinkable amounts of props and costumes can be a nightmare.
For me, it's been about 5 months of non-stop, just calluses on the ends of the fingers. But we'll get there.
Welcome to the bubble.
Welcome to the bubble.
This has been our home for what, the last year?
2 years.
No, we only had the bubble for about a year.
And the hostage.
Oh, and the hostage, yes, we can't forget the hostage.
And wrangling dozens of underpaid extras is a huge pain in the ass, I'm sure.
We've been using the army and we lost 5 orcs in the first day. Basically 2 to claustrophobia, 2 to twisted ankles, and 1 to a busted
Popped out
knee.
knee, yeah.
So.
And in total, like 7 down, I think.
7 down. 7 to Rapehu, 0 to us.
Yep.
So.
Going through them like flies.
Doing it all with CGI and green screen and whatnot is just a million times easier and cheaper. With that said, the overall artistic product is always hurt when you cut corners. But I think if the Lord of the Rings films were made 10 years later than they were, they would look a lot more like the Hobbit films, and I don't think they'd have the charm, magic, and longevity that they currently have. I don't plan on reviewing those Hobbit films anytime soon, but I can tell you right now that the Lord of the Rings films look and feel a million times better because of the better balance of practical and CG effects. There's a famous story that came out of the filming of those movies in which Ian McKellen apparently broke down in tears on set one day because he was filming his scenes alone on a green screen set surrounded by pictures of the characters he was supposed to be talking to.
Just tell me what happens, and then I'll try and do it without you. Okay. Telling me.
I don't think everything needs to be done practically, not even close, but the goal of any artistic work should be to make it as good as you possibly can. When you're dealing with the budgets that films like The Hobbit are able to play around with, it's no excuse to me. It's just studios being lazy and wanting to save a buck at the expense of artistic integrity. So yeah, visually, Fellowship of the Ring holds up very well.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Some of the digital stuff is a little dated, but it's overall solid enough even today, and the use of real environments stands out as immensely refreshing in 2022. The other huge element to this film is the production design as a whole. This is another place where it feels perfectly modern, if not better. Every set is dressed to perfection, every costume is meticulously crafted.
I mean, if it gets too hot, if it's summer and this person's travelling, it does have the idea behind it that this can be detached and then just whipped back on.
And every detail is accounted for with unmatched intricacy.
The handle is inlaid with a gold etching that's laid into the timber. It's got boxwood as the timber of the handles.
And now, I don't believe this. Is this the staghorn handle at this price?
It is, yep. It's the staghorn.
At this price? You have got to be kidding me. That's gotta be some kind of mistake right there.
That said, the only thing that stands out to me as kind of bad is the Mines of Moria, specifically when they reach the area with all the pillars. Gandalf is like, look y'all, the dwarf city of something or other, and everyone stands in complete awe. I mean, I'm sure it was hard to make and carve all of these pillars individually by hand, but this is the city?
There's an eye-opener and no mistake.
This dark room with no discernible lighting mechanism filled with nothing but pillars is a city? Please don't kill me, lorehounds. Maybe it's a perfect recreation of the city. I'm just saying it's kind of a boring location that doesn't justify these characters' reactions to it, in my opinion. The way Moria is portrayed in the upcoming Rings of Power show looks a lot more like a real city and something that would justify such a reaction.
Yes. Next time, I'm gonna punch him right in the
I already did that to him the other day, man.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. He cried as well. He was like,
Hey, mate!
hey, hey, what's going on? Coming on, Paul?
Hey! Hey, you guys. I've never met friends like you before on a set.
Shut up.
Let's talk about one of those better cities. It goes without saying, but I absolutely love Hobbiton. Not only is it an incredible feat to build a set like they did, but thematically as well. It's just so comfy. You get the sense that it's completely disconnected from the horrors that we see in the film's prologue. It's a perfect introduction that sets up the stakes for our characters as it gradually introduces us to the world of Middle-earth. We get organic exposition and a little bit of humor, all wrapped up in a once-in-a-generation score that I can't play for you. The feeling of comfort, quaintness, and smallness, both literal and metaphorical, regarding the simplicity of the hobbits' lives is perfectly captured in Hobbiton. Merry and Pippin screw up and nearly kill everyone with a magical firework. Gandalf just makes them go do the dishes as punishment. Aww. I simply can't imagine this whole intro sequence executed any better. Gandalf and Bilbo even smoke some dank kush together.
The finest weed in the South Valley.
While 95% of the film is executed flawlessly, the few moments where things get bad or cheesy stand out. Like Galadriel going gonzo always looked weird to me even as a kid, but in 2022 it just looks and feels bad. The wizard battle between Gandalf and Saruman is kind of cringe NGL as well.
The sequence where the wizards fight was always a problem for me because I really don't like wizards in movies. I don't like the idea of old guys firing blue lightning out of their fingertips and doing all the usual wizardy type stuff. And so
Harry Potter is a child's film.
I thought that the most interesting fight would be one where we strip away the magic to a large degree and we simply see two old guys beating the hell out of each other. I thought that would at least be kind of humorous.
Not sure what I'd have done different, but it stands out to me as a negative in an otherwise perfect film. Also, the scene where Aragorn is fighting the Five Wraiths on his own came across poorly to me in this most recent viewing. I actually laughed out loud when one of the ones he's fighting gets backed into a corner and just kinda jumps off the cliff. Like, why'd he do that? Could Aragorn actually kill him? Do they not take fall damage?
Weathertop was one of the very first things we filmed. This was done at the very beginning of our shooting schedule, so we were all a little bit green and naive, and you know, it's amazing when you start shooting a movie how awkward things are at the beginning, just from the point of view of directing the movie. And
it's not a big deal, but this fight isn't executed perfectly in my opinion. Still, like I said, 95% of the film is executed to perfection, so these few standout moments don't do a lot to hurt the film in holding up today. One element that maybe doesn't hold up, and I'm sorry, there was no avoiding it, okay, this is just the world we live in now. The film is very white and very male. In fact, the only two broads we see in the film are Arwen and Galadriel, played by Liv Tyler and Cate Blanchett respectively. As a side note, it's crazy how, despite only getting about 5 minutes of screen time each, Tyler and Blanchett are the 3rd and 6th billed performers respectively. That's crazy. It goes Elijah Wood, who gets 52 minutes of screen time, Ian McKellen as Gandalf with 37 minutes of screen time, Liv Tyler with 5 minutes, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn with 25 minutes, Sean Astin as Sam with 23 minutes, and then Cate Blanchett with 5 minutes. And then the rest of the cast follow. Cate Blanchett, well, okay, she had already gotten an Oscar nomination, but Liv Tyler at 3rd billing for Arwen is crazy.
We have the worst luck in the world.
Other than being Steven Tyler's daughter, the only really high-profile project she was in by that point was Armageddon, which was huge, I know, but regardless, her agent must have pulled out some insane magic to get Liv Tyler such a high billing for a fraction of the screen time shared by other major characters.
Hi, as I go over my lines. An embarrassment. Yeah.
Oh, what was I talking about? So yeah, a movie this white and this male-dominated probably would not get made as is by a studio today. We'd definitely see more minorities and women, regardless of what Tolkien's source material had. We have a solid piece of evidence that I'd be right and that the upcoming prequel show Rings of Power recently spurred up a bunch of controversy because Amazon is making an effort to be more inclusive, even in places where Tolkien's work might be contradicted. I honestly haven't looked too deeply into it. I can't stand this type of drama, but I think it had something to do with there being a black elf, which apparently contradicts Tolkien's original works where all of the elves were described as being very fair-skinned, almost white and glowing. Obviously, since everyone on the internet is a Tolkien purist, people were furious that there was a black elf. The teaser trailer for the show has an absurd like-to-dislike ratio. Seriously? Is the fact that all the elves aren't white anymore that much of a deal breaker for you? Seriously? I'm gonna be honest and say that I don't think it is. It's a very strange coincidence that people are mad about this change in particular and not the tons of other changes that are made when anything is adapted. Such an egregious deviation from Tolkien's work would not have flown in Peter Jackson's film series, no sir. Who cares if this one thing was changed to be more inclusive? There are black elves now. Whatever. Why not?
We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto.
Based on the stuff we've seen from Rings of Power, it does seem as though more women will be involved as well. So yeah, in regard to whether Fellowship holds up, the fact that the film is a huge sausage fest and is as white as it is probably wouldn't be seen today. What would they do if they made this film today? Would Gandalf be black? Would Arwen and Galadriel maybe have expanded roles? Would Sam be Latinx?
What was that?
I'm honestly not sure. As a side note, Morgan Freeman was actually one of the early names floated around to play Gandalf. Would people have exploded their diapers if that had happened back then too?
There are lots of things in these films which are not in the books. And I think in most cases they're improvements. Other people are going to complain about the absence of Tom Bombadil. Sad, yes, but I mean, this could go on and on and on and on and on.
I understand that Tolkien created these works to serve as a European mythology specifically for England, but that's not the world of today. Europe is less white. America is less white. Women have more prominence in our society as well than they did in medieval Europe or in Tolkien's time.
He couldn't have anticipated that his story was so rich, so human, so exciting and thrilling, that it would be a mythology for the whole world.
The times they are a-changin', ultimately for the better, I would say, in regard to inclusivity. So if this upcoming adaptation was just a bunch of straight white males, as Tolkien likely would have intended, it's the world he knew, and it was the world he was drawing from, it would be kinda weird.
Tolkien was profoundly pluralist. The Lord of the Rings is a multicultural and multiracial book. Against that pluralism, you have Mordor, which is one ring to rule them all.
Now, is it an issue for Fellowship? I don't think it is. It was definitely a different era when it came to people's perceptions of social equality, so the look of the film and its characters are partially a reflection of that.
If they get too much trouble, you just pick them up and they can't do anything.
All that aside, it's insane to me that the series even exists as it does. The wild and complex story of how these films got made has been told to death, so I won't detail it here, but the risk that New Line Cinema took is astonishing, and to be honest, completely nonsensical. I think if I were the one to make that decision back then, I'd have said no. Are you kidding me? They dropped $400 million, which was an absurd amount of money at the time, on a series of fantasy films known to be a risky bet in the box office, and handed the keys to this vehicle to a New Zealand filmmaker mostly known for making smaller budget horror comedies, and then signed off to film the whole thing back to back.
And that's when the thousands of people will be able to judge for themselves, have we all been crazy or lost our sense of proportion? No, they're going to discover we haven't. They're in for a real treat.
What if the first film was a flop? You've got 2 more $100 million turds waiting in tow.
It's a great risk that Bob took, Bob Shea, and I think it's paying off beautifully. The advance word on this is just that it's great.
What if Fellowship ended up looking and feeling like 2000's Dungeons and Dragons, which, for the record, was also distributed by New Line Cinema? This is the type of gamble that can sink a studio, and no matter how awesome of a pitch someone sold me, I simply don't think it'd be the right decision to make the series the way they did from a financial standpoint. From an artistic one, it's obviously the right choice. The films have a flow and continuity to them that you don't really get from a series that has breaks in its production.
It's almost like it was meant to be.
For a modern example, look at the current Dune film series. Warner Brothers didn't even greenlight the sequel to get made until after the film released and barely eked a profit, let alone let Denis film an entire freaking trilogy back to back before the release of one film.
You were shooting this for 16 months, and it's kind of risky to say, we know this is going to be so good, we're making 3 of them at once.
I know, right? Well, it's all banking on the first one, so if the first one fails, then we're screwed.
Ultimately, these choices led to a better product, and I can't be happier that I was not the person in charge of making this decision. It was a high-stakes gamble that quite literally could not have turned out better for both audiences and New Line Cinema executives. It goes without saying that Fellowship of the Ring absolutely holds up, and I don't think that is going to ever change. This film and the series that would follow it is a miracle, a triumph, and I truly believe they will live on as all-time eternal classics. What do you think? What parts are showing their age to you? What manages to feel perfectly modern? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. You can also watch my reviews of The Two Towers and Return of the King on my channel. Thanks for watching.
Mary McLaughlin